dividing line between science and pseudoscience is falsification. If you can't falsify it, if nobody listens to you, if you try to say they're wrong, according to some definitions, it's pseudoscience. According to that definition, the whole alarmist climate science is pseudoscience, because they don't listen to any skeptic.
I'm Joseph von Spakowski, the editor and technical producer for Climate Debrief. This episode is the second half of Angela's interview with Dr. Jules de Waart. I recommend that you watch our previous episode linked in the description below for further context and more insight on the subject. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
The IPCC's use of likelihood and confidence levels is praised for transparency, yet you argue these are surprisingly low for such consequential claims. Can you share a specific example where the confidence rating struck you as particularly revealing about internal IPCC doubts?
Yes. And to start with, consensus is alone not enough. 100% consensus about nonsense does not make it true. So more important are things like certainty, likelihood, and confidence. These are all very technical terms, also used by the IPCC. The IPCC very seldom speaks of proof or certainty, but it distinguishes between different degrees of likelihood. Virtually certain is very rare, and only a few statements are extremely likely. Most of the statements are considered likely or very likely. This means that according to the IPCC itself, the vast majority of its views should be assigned a likelihood of over 66% or over 90%, rarely over 95%, and very rarely over 99%. It's very honest, but also surprisingly low. In most social sciences, to make a scientifically sound statement, a likelihood of at least 95% is required. And in the exact sciences, it is still considerably higher. It's fair to say that climate science is characterized by conclusions costing many thousands of billions based on a comparatively low likelihood. And even more used than the term likelihood, the term uses the term confidence. Confidence is a degree of confidence the authors have in their own conclusions, in the conclusions of their own research group. Very high confidence is rather an exception. Usually confidence is high or medium, but even a medium confidence can mean that half of the authors of the research group disagree with the text. Low and medium confidence are normally used as an escape for scientists who have their doubts about the conclusions in the report but do not want to drop out. And we do have recent data available about the confidence in the reports AR5 and AR6. M.J. Corran published in 2021 a paper showing all these data. The paper was published in the Swiss journal Quartz, and that's not a climate science journal, but a journal devoted to the PR and sale of very expensive Swiss watches. In my opinion, ideal for an article on counting and very reliable. And Corran found that in the IR5 and IR6, no more than 6% of the conclusions had a very high confidence. In IR5, 20% of the conclusions had a low confidence, meaning that less than 4 out of 10 agreed. So in 2013, the majority of authors had medium or low confidence in their own conclusions. When the UNFCCC drafted the Paris Agreement in 2015, it knew that its conclusions could not be based on the confidence of the authors of the RR5. They did not care. Confidence in IR6 was considerably higher than in IR5, but still rather low. Too low to justify the many claims of an unprecedented and catastrophic climate change. Let's see a few examples of this doubt. IR5 notes a low confidence that's less than 4 out of 10 in cloud feedback, in aerosol forcing, in long-term solar forcings, in ice sheet dynamics, in droughts and floods and tropical cyclones. What else do you want? And IS6 confirmed this pattern. So we have to conclude that the IPCC promises to its policymakers levels of likelihood and confidence that are remarkably low, much lower than normally required for science-based conclusions. He must also conclude that the policymakers do not care.
You describe consensus as more political than scientific, noting how it helps secure the Paris Agreement. From your vantage point, how has the language of consensus been weaponized in policy debates, and what might a more honest framing look like?
Consensus was never a scientific argument. Modern science is directly related to the concept of falsification, not consensus. Consensus must be a bonus, a result of good science. It cannot be a method of arriving at those scientific positions, but consensus can play a role in the way people think about climate, and they are important for that reason. But for reasons I still do not understand, governments, scientific institutions, and media have, based on fairly little argument and basically no proof, accepted that the Earth and its climate is facing a catastrophe. Catastrophe that can only be diverted by total mitigation of greenhouse gases. It will cost trillions, destruct the economies and societies, but no one seems to care. Why? Why did Clinton sign the Kyoto Accords, defying the Senate, which voted 100-1 against it? Why did Obama so openly defend Cook's articles? The Belgian psychiatrist, de Smet, thinks that consensus, together with a strong precaution principle, it can be extremely attractive for people, as well as incredibly dangerous. People, he said, love consensus, preferably unanimity. But it is precisely in times of great unanimity that the greatest historical blunders have been committed. Blunders that are seldom imputed on their creators, be it politicians, media, or scientists. What might be a more honest framing look like? It's an uphill battle, not only against the media, the scientific institutions, and the governments, but also against Google, Wikipedia, WEF, most AI platforms, and of course UN and UNFCCC. We own the science, said the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, and she was not boasting. The UN was owning the science. It's not easy to find options that support critical views. And if you do, you will always find that alarmistic counter-arguments are attached to it. Sometimes honest and relevant ones, but mostly not. You cannot convince people in the old-fashioned way, with unbiased science and discussions. No one listens. That can be seriously detrimental to your career. Alarmists have painted themselves into a corner and refuse the humiliation to come out. I fear that things can only be changed with a kind of nuclear option, something close to what President Trump is now doing.
You mentioned thousands of scientists signing skeptical petitions, like Clintel's letter to the UN. How do you reconcile the apparent disconnect between these grassroots scientific voices and the institutional statements from academies of science?
It all started, of course, with the conference in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. Even then, there was quite a strong opposition against the outcomes of the convention. I think there were, at the convention itself in Rio, 300 signatories against it, concluding the views of about 30 or 40 Nobel Prize winners. There were very many Nobel Prize winners in Rio de Janeiro at that time. This Heidelberg appeal, as it was called, it got 4,000 signatories a few months later. That was in 1992. In 1997, when the Kyoto Conference was starting, there was an Oregon petition with about 31,000 signatories against it. And it was also that the United States Senate was against it with 100-1. Still, Clinton backed the Kyoto Accords, and it's, for me, still a bit strange. After the Kyoto, we had, of course, several other appeals and letters. The most important ones were the Manhattan Declaration in 2008 with 1,000 signatories. Also the United States Senate Minority Report, official report of the United States Senate with 1,000 signatories. Nobody cared. Then there was, in 2017, 300 scientists asking President Trump to go out of the Paris Agreement. That happened, but yes or no, the letter of the 300 scientists was important. I simply don't know. But in 2019, again, there was the Dutch Clinton organization who sent a letter to the UNFCCC with the message, there is no climate emergency, then signed by 500 scientists, and now I think 2,000 scientists on the list. So there was always a very, very strong opposition from grassroots scientists opposing their governments and their institutions. And that, but they always lost. They always lost from the UN bureaucrats, from the boards of the institutions, from the editors, from the press. And it's almost, unbelievable how much opposition there was and how little people know about that opposition. People think there was no opposition. People think everybody agreed. Now, tens, thousands of our best scientists were against it. Nobody knows. It's very strange. There's a big difference between arguments and power. And scientists, they argue from arguments. But people high up in institutions do not consider arguments a relative subject. A power, what they have, follows power and not arguments. And that's the disconnect. They can't talk with each other because sometimes they think that an argument is relevant, but it's not. And sometimes the institutions think that they have to listen to the powerful people, and if they don't, it's up to them, but they will feel the consequences. So there is a very strong disconnect between those two groups. And I can do anything about it. I can only see it.
Richard Feynman's cargo cult science analogy is striking when applied to IPCC reports. For our audience, could you elaborate on what aspects of the IPCC process, despite its rigor, remind you of this critique and where you still see genuine scientific value?
The dividing line between science and pseudoscience is falsification. If you can't falsify it, if nobody listens to you, if you try to say they're wrong, according to some definitions, it's pseudoscience. According to that definition, the whole alarmist climate science is pseudoscience because they don't listen to any skeptic. But also skeptic scientists try to avoid calling the mainstream climate science pseudoscience. It looks too much like real science. But that comes very close to what Feynman said about cargo cult science. Cargo cult science is exactly science that looks like science. It has all the outward appearances of science, but it lacks the inner motivation and the knowledge and the will to go for real science. And I think, in my opinion, that what climate science is doing is very close to cargo cult science also, and they admit. A very famous scientist, Stephen Schneider, who was the lead writer of several IPCC books, he published what he called a double ethical bind. And what he said is, climate change and the climate science is so important for the planet because we want to save the planet that we can afford a little bit careless with truth. That is permitted. But we should not really lie, but we can make far too dramatic statements. We can forget about the doubts we have ourselves. And we can always make the choice between what is effective and what is honest. And this is, of course, in science, a very dangerous thing. So you come with those things together, and they brought us the Feynman's cargo cult science, what says it is not really important whether it's science or not, if it looks like science. And Stephen Schneider's opinion that it doesn't really matter if it's not true, because we are doing a good thing. Those two things are probably important when you are looking for the truth in climate science.
Your book, Crisis or Hoax, Climate Change in Science, Media, and Politics, sheds a lot of light on this false climate crisis narrative, and I would recommend that to those listening to this now. And I would just like to ask, when you run across a climate alarmist, someone who believes in this false climate crisis, what words of wisdom would you give them?
I try to avoid speaking to alarmists, but of course, in your bridge club, in your family, there are always people, nice people, intelligent people, clever people, who are very staunch alarmists. And I do not know exactly what you can do. Arguments don't help much. What helps is probably the fact that they think, oh, that's somebody who's not that stupid and he thinks differently. Maybe there is something in that too. But in my opinion, when you consider the climate denier, what nobody is, but the climate skeptic, let's say, people avoid you. People who have jobs avoid you. People who are retired don't have to, but they have their own opinions. But when I am at a scientific conference from the Academy of Sciences, for example, and people notice that I am a climate skeptic, they walk away. And not once, it's normal. And I think I know, of course, that it's difficult for climate scientists because their jobs are insecure. They have their mortgages, their dogs want their food regularly, so they can't get dismissed. But it is absolutely a fact that it is an act of bravery now, if you have a job, to be a climate skeptic. People hold it against you. And for me, I don't care. I'm retired. I don't care. And I know that there are nice people who are alarmists. So why don't you talk about something else?
Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching. The Climate Debrief podcast is funded by listeners like you. If you enjoyed listening to this episode of Climate Debrief, please like, comment, and subscribe. We read all of your feedback. If you are interested in finding out more about the CO2 Coalition and its mission, visit our website at co2coalition.org. Our host and executive producer is Angela Wheeler. Production by Ethan Audie and Scott Wheeler. Technical production and editing by Joseph von Spakovsky.